Hello everyone, this is Mika. Another year, another iPhone. Welcome to the review of the new 2022 iPhone 14 Pro. Just to note, alongside this model, Apple has also introduced iPhone 14 Pro Max, iPhone 14, and the new iPhone 14 Plus, returning the Plus model name. In this video, we focus on the 14 Pro. The appearance has not changed compared to the last year's Model 13 Pro, at least not until you turn it on and notice the pill-shaped cutout above. But before that, let's look at other changes. Unfortunately, there aren't any major changes. Nothing really changed, apart from slightly larger camera housing and a new color, deep purple. There are other changes that are harder to see or test. For example, we are told that the screen got brighter. The SIM card slot disappeared in the US models. There is new crash detection, which I hope you would never need to use, and also the SOS satellite connection, currently available only in the US. This year, the box comes in white, yet all other Pro models came in black. Inside the box, it's the same story. One Apple sticker, one USB-C Lightning cable, and no charger. Now let's talk about that display. There are two things new here. First, the pill-shaped cutout is called Dynamic Island. This is somewhat interactive screen area around the front-facing camera, which cannot be customized at all. In fact, there isn't any setting labeled as Dynamic Island. By replacing the notch only for the Pro models, this area does two things. First, it animates different notifications or statuses, such as connecting wireless headphones, charging the device, turning the mute switch, and so on. And second, it acts as a quick toggle to do basic operations, such as change the new song now playing, pause or stop a timer. It is essentially a software widget that could be easily added to any smartphone. Apple advertises it as a new way to interact with iPhone, but really it is not, and you would rarely need to interact with it. Another thing to note is that the Dynamic Island visibly crops into 18:9 videos, and it is mildly annoying. But it is surprisingly good idea to update statuses of things happening on your phone that do not need to interrupt the screen. That said, this is not a reason to change your last year's iPhone, if you have one, just because of this. Another screen feature is that I wouldn't even consider it worthy to spend your money on, is always on display. Finally, Apple added this feature for those who wanted it. Yet somehow, they didn't learn anything from everyone else who already did this before, which is like most of Android smartphones. There is hardly any customization. You can only turn it on or off, not even set a time schedule. And on the Pro model, it consumes about 6 to 10% of battery. To me, this is done poorly and needs some work. It is clearly not a feature reason to buy a new iPhone. Moving on to battery, it is about the same as last year, which means it is really good and you can easily end up with 30 to 40% towards the end of the day with moderate use. And with light use, you can extend the battery to almost 2 days. Here, I would like to mention things that I was hoping Apple would have added, which unfortunately they didn't. That is the much faster wireless charging and the reverse wireless charging. The competition clearly offers faster speeds, and some even offer this really cool feature of reverse wireless charging, which is so useful for topping up your wireless headphones, for example. Regarding sound and speakers, I have noticed no difference against the 13 Pro, as you can hear in this clip. And just like Apple did on their presentation, there isn't much to say about performance. The new A16 Bionic chip is more than enough for anything you can do on this iPhone. There are no lags in the system, everything works smoothly. Apple, however, did spend a lot of time in their keynote on camera, which they always do. Here we have 3 new major changes. First is the move from 12 megapixels to 48 megapixels camera for the main sensor. Second is action mode, which is a special stabilized mode of shooting video. Where, as you can see, it feels like I am not running at all, despite clearly shaking the camera when recording the video. And the third is much improved selfie camera with autofocus and f1.9 aperture. Before we look at comparison photos versus 13 Pro, let me just note that although you can take a picture with 48 megapixels using Pro RAW, they will be very large in size, and I would not recommend anyone doing this unless you are working in photography or you want to use it in Photoshop. By default, it does take 12 megapixels, however, it is using all the sensor data from that 48 megapixels. Let's first focus on the main camera. In good light, there is almost no difference. I noticed warmer tones on the new 14 Pro, as well as more details when zoomed in on the final picture. It also seems that the focus is now much closer, and even though I am not using portrait mode here, you can clearly see that objects further than the subject are not in focus. There is much larger natural blur or natural bokeh. In bad light, I see improvements in more realistic colors, sharper details, but again, only when zoomed in. Now let's look at ultra-wide. In good light, I see sometimes better details, but not always. For example, here in the asphalt, and in this case, in the number plates. But these are very minor. In low light, I could not find any significant improvements in ultra-wide. And since the ultra-wide allows us to take macro photos, let's also compare those. In good light, photos turn out to be sharper, again, when zoomed in. And in bad light, this is where I see the largest gap in improvement so far in every aspect. And finally, let's compare the zoom cameras. Although iPhone 14 Pro has, again, the same 3 times zoom lens, it does allow 2 times zoom as well, without having another lens. So, in good light, I noticed much sharper images, more details and better color. But sometimes it is the opposite. For example, here, last year's model produced much better photo in my opinion. Well, that's it for the photos. I was planning to do this same comparison for video as well, but I realized that all my video clips are almost exactly the same. And there is very little to say when comparing video in both of these phones. They are both very similar and very, very good. Now for the pricing. In the US, the iPhone 14 Pro starts at $999. But as I already mentioned in the beginning of the video, there is no physical SIM card slot for the US models only. They have 2 eSIM cards instead. I don't like this change, and I don't think you can gain much by saving that space. And if you, like me, you can get an iPhone 14 Pro with a physical SIM card if you buy it from Canada, Europe, or anywhere else other than USA. For storage, we have the same as last year, 128, 256, 512 gigabytes, and 1 terabyte option. As also mentioned in the beginning, we have a new deep purple color, which is okay, but I prefer the iPhone 12 Pro Pacific Blue. This is my favorite color in recent years. And of course, if you're not into it, there's black, white, and gold. Okay, let's wrap it up. This year, Apple did not impress me with this new phone. And I understand that it is hard to do so when I have the last year's model. But that said, the new iPhone does not feel like new at all. It doesn't feel like a new generation. It doesn't have any significant improvements or gives us any good reason to switch from last year's, or 13 Pros, to this one. In fact, it is almost exactly the same as 13 Pro. But this is not a bad phone. This is indeed the best iPhone ever made. And anyone who buys it will enjoy everything it has to offer. But I would not recommend it, because how well last year's model holds up at much cheaper price. That's it. This video has been edited entirely on my new Apple MacBook Pro 2022, before which I have been using the MacBook Pro 2015 for almost 7 years, producing every single video on this channel. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.